Welcome to Making Work Work for Humans. What makes people want to stay, contribute, and thrive at work? It's a question I've been exploring for more than a decade through my work in workplace technology, employee experience, and organizational culture. I'm Selena Jeffrey, and as an MBA graduate and PhD candidate in organizational psychology, I'm particularly interested in the role trust, leadership, and human connection play in shaping the way we experience work. In each episode, I sit down with some of the brightest minds in leadership, employee experience, workplace culture, and organizational performance, from CEOs and founders to professors, researchers, and industry experts. We explore the ideas shaping the future of work and what it takes to truly create workplaces where people and organizations can thrive. Thank you for joining me. Today's conversation is about what happens when leadership, human biology, and artificial intelligence collide. As the pace of work accelerates and AI reshapes the workplace, many leaders are finding themselves operating in constant survival mode. But what if the greatest leadership advantage isn't mastering AI, it's mastering yourself? Today, we're exploring how to build resilient leaders, healthier teams, and high-performing organizations without sacrificing our humanity. Thanks for joining me. Joining me is Dr. Albert Viljoen, medical doctor, executive coach, and co-founder of Be Fully Human. Albert has spent 2 decades helping leaders sustain high performance without burning out by aligning biology, technology, and humanity. His tagline says it all: human-first leadership in the world of AI. Together, we'll explore how to ignore the noise, embrace AI wisely, and lead with calm, clarity, and presence in the fastest moving era of human history. Welcome to the podcast, Albert.
Thanks, Lena. Lovely to be here. Lovely to see you.
The biggest question I want to know, and this is purely for selfish reasons, is tell me, what was the moment that you went from being a medical doctor to focusing on being human in the workplace?
Big question. It takes me back to, I was working in Cape Town, just in a rural clinic, just outside of Cape Town called Kailicha. And I would work like long hours, like 60, 80 patients between a handful of doctors. Ironically, mainly lifestyle diseases, hypertension, diabetes, checking meds, just helping people in a sense maintain what's going on. And so I just felt like I'm helping people to sustain, but I'm not really addressing the core root. I'm not really addressing the lifestyle changes, the behavioral changes, sleep, stress, eating habits, exercise, all those things which lead people to the clinic. And so I was just, in a sense, the way that I like to think about it, I was at the waterfall's edge, catching people just before they fall over the cliff. And I knew something needed to change, at least for me, in terms of how I support people. So I looked in different directions and I found coaching, and it felt like a better initiative because I could move upstream and I could help people make the kind of choices they need to make to keep them from ending up in the A&E or in the consulting room. And so a couple of years I did coaching, helping with behavior change, helping people with life coaching, with business coaching, executive coaching, and then realized, well, these same people who make these choices are working most of their lives in organizations and cultures that don't necessarily support those good choices that we want to make. And so I've moved further up, supporting leaders mainly these days with how do I, as a business leader, support my people and my culture so that the environment that we're actually creating at work helps the people make the kind of choices that gives them better lives. So they don't end up either in A&E or in clinics or just essentially miserable at work, which is so moving from the waterfall's edge upstream all the way to the top of the mountain to change cultures. That's the big mission. So it wasn't really a pivot for me. Personally, it feels like it was more a progression of the same mission that I was on when I did medicine.
Well, so instead of going into the prevention of putting the right things in place, such as valuing sleep, the basic things, what we actually eat, how are we spending our time, and are we putting ourselves in environments that are actually making us flourish or making us sick?
Yeah, exactly. And it's ironic, right? Because we don't have to go into the whole pandemic and the pivot that happened then, but what I've seen more and more with leadership coaching these days is the biggest outtakes from coaching sessions tends to be sleep, eat, boundaries. How do I switch my phone off? It's not the big choices that leaders are grappling with or struggling with. It tends to be the more basic lifestyle choices and how to set stronger boundaries, how to delegate more effectively in order to be a human being that can work well and perform well, but also that feels satisfied and grounded and connected in their day-to-day lives with their kids.
Can you walk me through the pressures that leaders are facing right now? You've said every leader, every team, every organization is being hit by multiple waves of disruption all at once, almost like a stacked disruption. That's how you've framed it. The World Economic Forum even calls the moment the perfect storm. How do you balance that as a leader? How do you have all of this stuff coming at you at once and also at the same time be able to manage the simple things of, making sure you're managing your sleep, your boundaries with your phone and things like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. This year's World Economic Forum's review, where they basically evaluated the landscape that we're currently in and they project some skills that we'll need in 2030. And they've highlighted a few specific disruptions or storms that they would call it. The one is obviously, as we know, the AI disruption, which is taking up all our LinkedIn feeds with AI posts. So technological change. The other one's the economic pressure that the whole world is under. Then there's climate change and green transitions, which a lot of businesses are grappling with, is how do they make the green transition while still hitting the bottom line? There's also massive demographic shifts. Apparently, the new global workforce is mainly going to come from India and sub-Saharan Africa, 2/3 of the global workforce. So there's a shift in where the workforce is essentially coming from and what their context looks like. And then lastly, the geopolitical transition we're in with a lot of unrest in different countries. So these are the kind of big picture challenges leaders are facing. And then we need to try and monitor our sleep and eat healthy at the same time. And so what I've seen happens more often in the coaching room is one, we almost need to buckle down on the basics. What I often tell people is if you stack up more pressure at the top, you need to make sure that you have the structures and the foundations at the bottom to support that. So getting a lot more rigid with certain routines and structures to help us. That's the one piece. So self-management. What is my routine and structures that I put in place? And then the second one is what the developing skill set for leaders, which is about adaptive leadership, is we don't know how these massive pressures are going to change in the next couple of years. But what we do know is that change is going to be a lot more constant. And so it's not just about learning EQ or learning how to delegate or learning time management. It's learning how do I handle any form of unrest and unpredictability? How do I build the flexibility and the adaptability so that I don't crack or break under pressure? And how do I support my team to handle the uncertainties? Because what happens in the face of uncertainty is we try to make things certain. We try to make a plan, figure it out, have a map. What we actually need to do is learn how to be with uncertainty, how to navigate the lack of clarity while still feeling reasonably resourced and supported by our teams.
That is a very interesting point because it sounds so simple when you sort of put it together that way. There's so many factors that are playing out at this moment of change. And it takes us into the topic that I really wanted to speak about is when you've experienced the chaos of the emergency room and then you sometimes overwhelm and the pressure that leaders are under within the workplace and what's happening in this environment. What physiologically is happening with the body and even the leader's brain when this is playing out?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad you brought us back to the body. So in my consulting, the way that I often talk to leaders when I talk about the way that I coach is head, heart, and body. And as you know, and I know, especially working remotely, we're very preoccupied with the mind, with mindset. We're working remotely, we're working digitally. We treat our bodies more like machines that carry around the brain. And we don't realize that the human body, the organism, is where one, a lot of resources sit, but also our nervous system, the structure that holds it all together and that runs this biological system needs tending to, and we need to take care of it. So what we often would do with leaders is, yes, there's the mindset, there's the structures, there's the kind of basic tools that you can use externally. But at the base, you need to support your nervous system. And to support your nervous system, you need to have techniques and skills to self-regulate. And so if you compare it to working in the A&E, what the doctors would do if we get a lot of patients coming in, the first step is triage. So the patients will go see a nurse and the nurse will qualify you as red, orange, or green. Red patients obviously need attention first and then orange and then green. And if you translate that to the workplace, externally, a leader obviously needs to prioritize what's urgent, what's important, and what can wait. But internally, it's the same thing. How do I get my nervous system to move from the red state, which is panic and overwhelm, to a green state, which is focused and adaptive? And so part of that is actually building physiological rhythms in. I had a client who's a trader, and they came to me specifically because they wanted to be able to switch off from work at the end of the day. Yes, they need to be switched on and, constantly thinking, but how do I switch this brain off when I'm with my kids and I want to pay attention to them. So what they had to do was build in small rituals during the day where they basically mode shift. So instead of being in thinking mode, they have to step away from their desk and they build in the structure where they go for a walk, they sit down, they take in the environment. Some people would use meditation. Some people would use walking. It doesn't really matter what the tool is, but the impact is how do I shift the gear of my nervous system so that I can train my brain to move from fast thinking, red zone, panic, switched on mode to reflective, connected, receptive mode. Because if you don't train it, just like the muscles, you're able to keep running in the same mechanism.
Let's unpack these. I know for a fact when I'm sitting at my desk and I'm between assessments and researching and work, I just don't stop. So are you saying that, for example, if you're at work and then you get home and your brain doesn't stop, are you saying that during the day you go out for one small break, or you make consistent breaks throughout the day where you move yourself out of your environment into, say, walking outside, looking at the birds, looking at the trees, and bringing yourself back to the present?
It's a good question. And I would say, in broad sense, it depends. It depends on your routine and your ritual. But the basic principle is that you need to train your mind to be able to switch gears, almost like to lubricate the gears. If you don't know how to switch from fast-paced thinking mode into rest and receptive mode, it's going to be much harder for you to do when you want to consciously switch it. Oftentimes, as an example, I'd have clients who say, "Oh, I used to do meditation and it really helped, but then I stopped and now I really struggle." I'm like, well, how about we start that back up again? It's a sense of your nervous system learns certain patterns and routines. And if you do it again and again, then switching gear becomes much easier. I had another colleague of mine who says before he does presentations, he used to be very panicked in presentations and kind of stumble and the whole chest and heart palpitations. And he said what he would do is he would do a short breathing and grounding practice. So he would do a longer exhale, which is a very useful breathing technique, feeling your feet, feeling your back, orienting to taking in the environment. So he would do that for almost 15 minutes. And then he would feel steady, let's say 3 out of 10, if 10 is panic. And then he would go into the presentation. Obviously, the presentation makes you a little bit more agitated, so he'll be at 5 or 6. He did that consistently. Now it takes him 2 minutes instead of 15 minutes. Why? Because the minute he sits down and starts breathing, the brain starts down gearing naturally because it's a muscle. So if you train your nervous system to switch gear and you feel the difference in your body and you notice, oh, I feel different. This feels better. This is good. I want to come back here. Because if we're too in our heads, we just don't feel our bodies. We're almost like disconnected from what's going on.
And I did have a funny moment of like, well, your team looks out the window and you're out there hugging a tree. It's like, okay, that's obviously not the solution. And they're like, what are they doing? But feeling is so important. And I always have found that if I do the deep breathing of holding at the top and holding at the bottom and then deep breathing, that just brings me back to myself. So then I can actually just calm myself. Because it's just such a state of stress. It's interesting. So if, for example, a leader, and we've all been through this where we're in a state of maybe chaos or something's unpredictable in the organization, and a leader finds themselves where they're in survival mode. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's very much that state of the body where it's, it's fight, flight, freeze. Sometimes we don't even realize that we're in that state. What is a sign that someone can look for that they realize I'm in a state of survival right now? I'm not neutral.
Yeah, that's a great question. It will look different for different people. I would even go before what do I look for is have I even looked? Have I even paused to check in? So, so I do coaching and we obviously run the mentoring platform. And often in a mentoring relationship or a coaching relationship or any relationship that takes you out of the situation and goes, let's just check in. How am I doing? That would be the first step. Funny enough, if you just make the time, I actually had a client the other day and they run multiple projects a day. They're constantly back to back. And they showed up for the session and said, you know what, I haven't even had time to prepare. And it took them about 10, 15 minutes just to shift gear and go, how am I? How am I actually doing? If you just start with that question and you give yourself that time, you'll start noticing what you feel like. And I would always ask people, what do you notice in your body? That's the first starting point. Just what do you notice? Immediately the body will tell you. There's a signal always coming to the brain. 80% of the nervous system is coming signals up. 20% top down. So the information's coming up if I pause and listen. And so the client will say, I feel tension in my shoulder, or I feel I'm not breathing. And those signals immediately will give you some indication or clue as to how am I doing right now? Often in coaching, people will show up and say, I'm exhausted. I need a break, but I need to work, right? And so we We override these signals that come in. And so this is a long-winded way of saying the question is not necessarily how do I know? You'll know if you stop and you take a breath and you go, what do I feel in my body? What's happening? And then what does this tell me? If I feel tension in my chest, what is this telling me? And if I listen, it might go, you know what, I'm quite tense about the presentation. Or I might feel, I'm not breathing. You know what? It's because of this other project that's behind schedule. If we learn to just tune in the moment, one of the mechanisms I often encourage people to try and implement, if you can, is see if you can have a 10-minute gap between your meetings. So only have 50-minute meetings. Humans are great. If we know there's 10-minute gap, we'll fill it with something. But if we know the meeting ends at 50, we'll find a way to make sure that we wrap up before the hour. And that 10-minute break can be life-changing because it just gives you a moment to zoom out, take a breather, take stock. How am I doing? What do I need to do differently? And then go back in instead of this escalating hamster wheel that in the end of the day, you start falling over your own feet.
I absolutely agree with that. And I'm sure we've all been there because I remember I was managing this very big client and in a very busy agency. I would just have constant meetings and then I'd have people coming up to me all the time and my brain was all over the place until I ended up picking up a book called The Third Space. I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but it changed my life. Being able to go, I'm not going to have back-to-back meetings. I'm going to provide time and space between each meeting. And then I'm going to spend half of that space going, what was that meeting? What was the recap? Yep, no worries, close. Okay, where's my next meeting? Okay, yep. Where am I going to? What am I doing? What's my outcome? And then I would go into that meeting with my brain present instead of being scattered from all the other meetings I'd been into.
In some ways, it's quite basic, isn't it? Respecting the fact that we are biological beings. And I think that's the emphasis often in my coaching is no, we're all about technology and AI and almost pulling out of ourselves. But as a human being, for this period of time, probably for quite a while, we are primarily biological and there's certain natural rhythms and parameters. You use utensils for their purpose. I use this mug to drink, right?
Can we please show the mug?
Yeah. I was sheep.
And for people listening, it is actually a pottery cup made of a sheep or a lamb. Is it a lamb?
It's a little lamb sheep thing with horns.
Very cute.
Yeah.
It's very amazing. Definitely feel free to send that over to me, please. So you can pass it forward. Like you got yours passed forward.
I got mine from a friend. Exactly. It's good. But and it's these little moments of humanity, these little moments of joy that often get shaved off when we're too busy with the day-to-day functioning, the machine of work. Which is why I often bring people back to primarily the body because it gives us a lot of information. It's what we're working with. And then from there go, okay, how do I structure my day, my team in the storms that we're facing in a way that's aligned with our biology and that feels like we can adapt and meet the storms with some resourcefulness rather than feeling overwhelmed most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if we look on the cause and effect of that, so if we look at, for example, a leader who has been they're caught up in the chaos, they're not able to regulate themselves. What is the impact to the organization and teams and their people if a leader is in survival mode?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. So a lot of people might know about this because it's quite pop culture, but you get the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, as you said, when we're in survival mode. But what happens biologically when we're in a state of panic, the body is really intelligent. So the blood distribution and the attention and where your capacity goes shifts from frontal lobe, which is thinking rationally, reflecting, making plans, to the more primal parts of the brain to just keep the basic biological functions going. And so what happens when we're in survival mode is that all of our capacities to think clearly and plan ahead and be rational gets downshifted. And so our capacity to think clearly is actually lower, biologically speaking. Anyone who's suddenly had to do a presentation and had stage fright or get overwhelmed, know that feeling. When you've rehearsed this so many times and it's in the brain, but somehow I can't get that file cabinet open. And it's simply because your panic mode shifts the attention from, I need to breathe, I need to survive, I need to just not die. So you can't actually access that part of your brain. So it's not just that it feels good to build these skills and feel more resourceful. It's that it becomes a business imperative because your top leaders in survival mode make really bad decisions when they're overwhelmed, not because they're bad people, but because that part of their brain is just inaccessible. And so having the awareness that we need to be regulated in our nervous system, but secondly, having the skills and the training becomes important for you because your ROI will be impacted. The rational decisions that you rely your team leader to make can only be made if they're not in survival mode. And if they are, they need to go, hold on, I'm in survival mode. I'm in red. How do I downshift? I need to take a step back. I need to take a breather. I need to compose myself again. And they, in the end, start modeling it to their teams as well, right? If you're in survival mode, they start panicking. And so the whole team
Mhm.
starts getting disconnected.
And that's such an interesting point because once that starts to happen, it's a downward spiral from there. Talk me through what could possibly play out when that starts to happen in an organization.
Yeah. So I've had a client the other day, and it's so interesting. She has a mentor in the company. And so she feels like this mentoring relationship is great because the mentor's outside of a team and the mentor gives us some support and advice. And I think one of the interesting things with a good mentor is that they can help you think through more than just the day-to-day tasks, that because they have their own experiences, they would
Mm.
also give you advice on, okay, how do you handle a difficult relationship? This is what I used to do. These are the structures. Like you would, if you were a mentor, you would basically say, you know what, this is what I do with my meetings. I schedule time before and after. Those little gems. But what she also did in the coaching sessions, she said, you know what, my manager is in survival mode. And so he is making so many bad choices. I can see he's in survival mode because as the direct report know these things and I've educated myself. But he's the one making the final call. And sadly, what happens is now they start cutting important parts of the budget. They cut the coaching, they cut the initiatives that build these resources, and I'm going to leave. If I'm either going to leave or I'm just going to stop offering suggestions. So what happens with your greatest talent is either they shrink, they go, you know what, it's not worth my time because the manager who's supposed to be a good manager doesn't have the capacity. So they don't offer value, or they leave because they can spot when a system is not functioning well. The best talent are the people that already know these things that we're talking about and they're implementing it. And they can sense which environment will support that and bring their talents forth and which environments just don't do that and then they'll pull it back. So that's a very big risk. And sadly, I've seen this happen too many times, that talent leave because we just don't call out the big environmental pressures and we don't give the support where it's needed. And we don't educate people. We don't educate the leaders on these fundamental scaffolding, as I like to call it, of being a high performing team.
If we just talk about that scenario, the leader most likely would never want to lose that top talent.
No.
It's
Mm,
probably a very high performer. It's so hard to retain. And yet, due to sitting in that state of survival, they've actually achieved the complete opposite of what they're trying to achieve in their
mm,
organization, which is high performance, which leads to high profits, which leads to multiple things of like a great culture and people performing and are really
mm.
engaged in their work. And then instead, when they're sitting in survival mode, just ripples down to everyone.
Exactly.
I know this is a simple example of how your impact on other people ripples down and has an after effect. Is like, I went to a Pilates class and she's very serious and she was been a dancer all her life and she's so serious, but she has this underlying current of the most hilarious wit about her. But she says it all in a straight face. And as much as you're dying on the mat, everyone's in pain, dying, burning, but we're all laughing. And then you leave, and I was like, I just been absolutely destroyed.
Yeah, exactly. And that's such a good example. Yeah.
Pain of my life, and it came out, and I was all happy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it is such a good example because I think you're highlighting such an important point, right? Oftentimes, I think people see high performing cultures as very serious and driven, and then happy cultures as not performing. But it's not the case. The highest performing cultures actually are very happy. They're exactly like I said, I'm dead at the end of the day and I'm laughing. Why? Because my team leaders, my organization knows how to push me without driving me into survival mode. They know how to support me. Think of an athlete, right? Athletes have incredible rest and recovery cycles with their performance cycles. My business partner, who is sports science and work with athletes, and now we translate that into the business space, is the nervous system expert. And what he'd often teach leaders is about these cycles. You need to build in your rest cycles like an athlete builds in a rest cycle. Not because, and it's weird, isn't it? We have these very linear benchmarks at work, but humans don't function that way. If you rest well, you recover well, you build those structures and resources, those 10 minutes between meetings, then your performance excels. And so it's equal. The output and the input is the same. And same with the Pilates instructor. Yes, she pushes you, but also her nervous system and her joy and her humor is a way to resource you at the bottom
Mm,
so that you can push further at the top. If you've got a really angry, really overwhelmed manager pushing you, immediately that band shrinks. You don't have enough
mm.
support and your output just diminishes. It's almost quite logical. but we don't translate those basics into the corporate environment for some reason.
Because what would happen with the employees and the teams is they would tip into survival mode, and then they would be overworking and overproducing and producing work that's probably not at a level that they normally would, and then they end up burning out, and then they're just turning up to work and just doing the best that they can, which is not at the level they could do. So it really has a massive, profound impact on the business. And then you put it, and I think it's such a great way to describe it, is to master your biology. That
Yeah.
is just the most brilliant way that you've put it. And it's
Mhm.
so true. When do we ever walk through, an office and we're stressed and I'm like, oh my God, I've got to master my biology. And it's like, but it's mastering yourself, isn't it?
Yeah,
It,
exactly. Yeah, because we are biological beings. We somehow lose touch with that in the work because our attention and our focus tends to be on the digital and on the conceptual, right? Especially in the knowledge economy. If we look back in the past, we used to work the fields. Athletes work with their bodies consciously, so they're more aware of it. But we have the exact same system that we're working with. And the leaders who know that, the ones who perform really well, they know that. They build in religious routines. What's interesting, like we've got a little bit, and often when I talk about this, people immediately think gym, exercise, high intensity training, which is fair. But there's a slight disconnect because let's say you've had a massive day of pushing into 8 out of 10 intensity. Now you go to gym, what do? Hit high intensity training again. So what you're doing is
Mhm.
you're ramping up your nervous system again. Now you try to go to bed and you can't go to bed. Why? Because you're pumped full of adrenaline. You've never allowed yourself a down cycle. Pilates, yoga, breathing, those kind of practices might feel less comfortable because we like the adrenaline, but it's a necessary part to restore and replenish and go to sleep and then to pick it up again. And so learning what's the up cycle and the down cycle is so important because if you stay on the up cycle for too long, it feels good until what happens? Breakdown.
So end up at the GP.
Yeah,
Ha-
yeah. I'm trying to keep people out of that space. And the driven people like yourself, we know this, right? We know that we work and work and work. Then we go on holiday and somehow we're sick. Why am I sick? Of course you're sick because you've spent all your resources. You never created that natural cycle of replenishment. The same client was so great. He said, I used to get sick every holiday and then I decided I don't want to be sick anymore. And so what I did was I basically worked less intensely, still have great output, still very productive, a high performer, but now I get to enjoy my holidays because when I go on holiday, my system is not just collapsing because I've created that natural cycle before I even went away. And so if we just align it with the biology, we can have it all, but we need to respect the parameters of how we actually function in the day to day.
I know you've completely explained how the body works when it comes to that, but I don't know how many times I've been away and I got sick. Let's just explain it very simply. What happens with the body when you are working, pushing yourself and not having those in between breaks of going away for the weekend and going and being in touch with nature? You're just pushing yourself, and you finally get to holidays and you get sick. I know you said that the body just collapses, but what actually happens?
So it's complex, but let me use a simple analogy to explain that. If you think about your body, just because the thing as well is because of society and gym and mechanics, we tend to think of the body as a machine, but the body is not a machine. The body is a biological organism. So let's say you're farming a piece of land. Farmers know that there's a certain amount of nutrients in the soil. And so they plant and then, they grow crops and then the nutrients move from the soil into the crops, right? There's a very natural movement of resources. And then we pick the crops, etc. Then at some point that soil needs to rest. Why? Because we need to somehow put the nutrients back into the soil. Now, the human body works in a similar way. We have certain resources, nutrients, immune system, etc., happening right at the baseline as a resource. Now you're extracting that resource to work. If you don't replenish those resources, which includes your immune system, your food, nutrition, sleep, your cells need to restore when you go to sleep. If you don't have enough, you start stripping and stripping and stripping it away. So by the time you go on holiday, there's just nothing left. And so when your body then starts trying to restore, it's also just a lot weaker. Because while you're functioning on adrenaline, you can push against diseases, you can fight the diseases. But at some point, your immune system just says, we only have, 10 troops available and we're overwhelmed by the disease. And we have to now focus on restoring. So either you burn out while you're at work or you just feel that little dip when you're on the holiday because there's just no additional resources to fight disease and to replenish the cells and to replenish your immune system. That's why I like to think of it just in a very simple way as output and input. if I don't have enough input or replenishment happening regularly, the people who have to fight the enemies, the diseases, and replenish, they can't do both. And so we have to prioritize one thing over the other. And think about it, right? If you're on holiday, often people will crash out, they'll sleep a lot more. Why? Because the body just does what it needs to do. It's intelligent. And it's okay. We can handle a cold. We can handle a little bit of a flu, but our focus priority now is to get the stores back up so that when we have to do output again back at work, that we have some resources available.
So it's all about going back to that mastering of yourself, staying disciplined, but even staying disciplined, not as in pushing yourself all the time, staying disciplined to be like even myself when I'm at my desk and I know my Pilates class is starting soon, to make sure that I leave my desk and then I get dressed and I go and I feel better for it afterwards.
Yeah. What I often just try to push as a mindset change is that Pilates class is not you stepping away from work. It's you replenishing your capacity for work, right? Athletes know this. Athletes have very, very rigid rest and recovery cycles. You don't see someone, doing laps and laps and laps just before the Olympics. No, they rest and they replenish their nutrition. But somehow at work, we see that as taking time away from work. You're not. You're actually just recharging the battery. You plug your iPhone in. Why don't you plug yourself in as well?
And I always find if my battery is really low, I just think, you know what? I'm wasting my time sitting here trying to do this. I'm just going to finish up, have a nice meal, go to bed early, wake up early, and then start again. And you get it done clearer, quicker, faster, and it's a better result.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Your output will definitely improve. And on that note, I think another thing that I tend to, especially when you work more in senior leadership, is you can get the kind of average leadership, which is, okay, I'm at the bottom, I need to rest. But good leadership says, okay, we're at 20%. I need to rest now, because if I wait till I hit the bottom, then I start risking disease, burnout. Like I start putting my body and my mind at more risk. Why don't I build capacity? Also, if you're working at 120% capacity, you have no buffer. You can't handle curveballs. You can't handle difficult clients because you haven't made space for them. A good leader actually works at 80 or 70%. You need to have that buffer so that by the peaks that we always get in business, that you have that adaptability to meet those demands more effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've all been there. And it's just learning how to really, as you say, again, just really mastering your biology. For example, I've developed a trust scorecard, and it's a self-reflective for organizations and for individuals. It's a tool where they can, firstly, to build trust, they need to actually look at themselves first. So it starts with the self. And then if they can then be honest with themselves, and they can then look at the environment around them about what's happening. Is it a high trust environment? And then organizations can actually look from an organizational point of view as, are people modeling high trust?
Exactly.
So it really does come back to yourself. Albert, I really wanted to move into the piece around human first leadership in the age of AI. Now, I know you work in this area a lot around where we're constantly overloaded. There's all these constant posts on LinkedIn and on social media about AI, and it's taking over. And sometimes it's like, did somebody actually write that? Or did AI write that? Or when someone sends you a text message, did they write that or did AI write that? But it's becoming very overwhelming. And you shared an article with me earlier today, and it discusses for the first time in history the skills we need to succeed technically are the same ones we've always needed to thrive as humans. Can you talk a little bit about that and just talk us through what that is and what that looks like?
Yeah. So this is also from the World Economic Forum research I did this year. And they're basically projecting that in 2030, the top 10 skills we have are, and I'm going to just kind of list them out and then I'll talk a bit more about them. The first one is analytical thinking. Second one is resilience and reflexivity and agility. Third one is leadership. And the fourth one is creative thinking. Then it's motivation and self-awareness. Then there's technological literacy. Then we're back to human skills, which is empathy and active listening, curiosity and lifelong learning. Then we've got one other skill, which is talent management. And then the 10th skill is service orientation and customer service. So essentially 8 out of the top 10 skills are human skills. They're the stuff, that we practice day to day. It's interpersonal, it's creative thinking. And only one of them is technical. And what's been interesting for me is when we look at AI as one of the most massive disruptors in our era, we tend to focus on the tools, the speed. How do we get this? How do we be more efficient? We almost focus on the mechanical side of it. But the impact we've seen and the needs that's emerging is not technical. It's primarily human. When I think about some of the articles that came out and the repercussions of AI, for the first time, people are starting to ask very existential questions about what does it mean to be human? When have we ever asked that in the history
Mm.
of working? Is we ask what is human because the machine emulates being a human so well that makes me ask, well, what makes me useful at work, and what makes work worth doing, and what do I do? And so we have these massive questions that's emerging. And ironically, the tool is the last bit of the focus. What we actually need to focus is, how do we navigate as people? How do we navigate relationships? How do we navigate performance reviews? How do we navigate difficult conversations? Because the tools will essentially free us up from a lot of the technical skills. And what will remain is, how do I have that really difficult client relationship? You can have, all the AI getting all the leads funneled through to your sales team, but the sale happens between one person and another person. It's going to be much harder for me to buy from technology, because in the end, people want to hear from people. People trust people. Yes, AI has usefulness. AI gives us pattern recognition. It gives us data, but it doesn't build trust. It doesn't build connection. It doesn't build meaning at work. No one will feel fulfilled if they spend their entire day surrounded by AI. They find fulfillment in relationship and meaning and industry. I want to feel like I'm contributing. So there's real fundamental needs of what makes a human thrive is surfacing again, and we're being confronted with it. And so what I often tell leaders is, yes, AI is important, but don't get distracted by the smoke. The fire is happening on the ground, and the fire is what's happening with your people. How are you supporting your people with working with these tools, confronting the challenges, and then rising above the challenges by actually building those skills that we need in the next 10 years?
And also, too, having the open, transparent conversations. What a lot of people are thinking is, will I have a job? Will I be replaced by AI? And I think if leaders can sit down with their people and have a conversation around, this is where AI is going to be a part of our organization. This is where we're looking at bringing it into the workforce, where your role is going to be enhanced. You're not going to lose jobs. And even if it's just that one simple conversation, hearing that alone would remove people from that state of fear to feeling safer in the
Yeah.
workplace.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would agree. I also think, and this is back to, those 10 skills and what leaders need to get better at, is it's also important to tell your people we don't know. Because leaders often feel pressure to have the answer, to give the answer, to give direction, to give clarity. And then until they have clarity, they say nothing. And if you've ever been in a team where people keep quiet at the top, it's much worse than if they just tell you, we don't know. Why? Because you make up all these extreme worst case scenario stories. So leaders need to be better at going, you know what? This is what we do know. This is what we don't know. This is what we need to figure out. And simply communicating that doesn't show that you're not a good leader or that you don't know what's going on. It demonstrates vulnerability. It demonstrates honesty and transparency. And it also initiates collaboration. Because the minute I say, I'm not sure what's going to happen to the marketing team, because it seems like all these tools could replace you, let's start a workshop and work through this together. That way, you're empowering your team to also contribute and share their expertise, because they're experts in their industry. But it also helps you as a leader figure out how to bring these tools in a mindful way, in a collaborative way, and also to maintain the human trust, right? That's the thing that we want to hold on to. We want to have teams that feel like they like to work here. So that's a very important part of it, is you don't have to have the answers, but you do need to confront these challenges together as well.
You pointed out a really key point here around that the leader, when he engages and brings in and collaborates with the certain teams or roles or departments, is by having that collaboration, you'd be most likely, and you would not maybe uncover things that you didn't even know, where then you're making a decision that's informed. I've always said, when you have data, you can make informed decisions, and having those conversations is collaborating and even understanding, this is what this team actually does. This is what we can actually move over to AI, and AI can take care of that, but we still need this part.
Yeah.
And that's where the informed decision actually comes from. And then people actually feel that they're empowered to still be holding to their roles and being able to do what they love more doing than the sort of the administrative tasks.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm talking at a AI summit next week, specifically on this as part of the consulting. And what I've seen is a lot of businesses either just roll out tools randomly because we're quite busy. So people try our tools or they say, let's just try this thing. Or they make massive decisions, right? There's these companies that fire a lot of employees and then hire AI chatbots. And we've seen 2025 is one of the years where people are being hired back. Why? Because we realize we've moved too fast to try and keep pace and we haven't really thought it through. But what you're saying is so critical that data isn't just what the dashboard shows you. Data is what happens when you talk to people in your organization, because the people on the ground have data in relationship and in themselves that's not on a dashboard. And they often have qualitative, very insightful and poignant data because they can contextualize the data. They know that this is actually how this workflow happens in real time. We have the book somewhere that says how this workflow should happen. This is how it really happens. Then you have your AI consultant come in, evaluate the workflow, and make more strategic decisions. So when you deploy AI, you don't have to pull it back a year later because you moved too fast, because you worked with your team to bring it in a way that supports that. It improves your personal brand as a leader, if that's important for you, because you're showing, I want to work with you as people and implement AI, not AI for people, which is the current narrative that, takes up the media. Is it you or is it the machine? If a leader works with their team, you'll have better solutions and also you'll have a better team because you're working together.
So, Albert, to coach high performance in your daily work, and I love how you highlight in the document that you sent me earlier today that coaching is no longer just for the execs. It's not a performance perk, and it's the very foundation and scaffolding of a business. I love how you phrase it in a way that think of it like the gym. You don't go to the gym because you're broken. You go because you want to be fit and adaptable and strong enough, especially when the market gets tough. And can you just talk me through a little bit around what I read today about reflection, regulation, clarity under pressure equals leadership results?
Yeah. So I think the piece around how coaching is becoming the scaffolding rather than just for the execs has to do a lot with this context that we've shared earlier about the skills, the human skills becoming central. And so in a way, it ties it all together. So coaching, I would say mentoring also plays a role there because a mentor can sometimes support a mentee with some of those basic fundamental human skills. But essentially think of it this way. If you go to a coach and they give you some supportive reflections and tools, what they're actually doing is they're building the scaffolding and the foundation so that you can perform at your best. And so as an example, that client that I said earlier, the fact that he had that coaching session in a sense wedged in between other meetings forced him to recap, to step out of his workplace, to reevaluate what's on his plate, what's coming ahead, what's behind him from a bird's eye view, and to make strategic decisions about the projects. Let's say we take that coaching session out. What happens is he keeps running the hamster wheel. And 2 weeks later, he burns out because he's never had that time to step back, to reevaluate his priorities, to reconnect to the skills that he needs to have, and to actually work in a strategic way for longer impact. So companies that seem to be doing better are the companies that have coaches and other support systems in place for people to be more strategic about how they work. The companies who burn out are the ones who keep people just running on the hamster wheel and then replacing them. Right? We have this massive churn companies. And you can choose what culture you have. Some companies function in a very churn-oriented way where people are treated more in a mechanistic way. You fulfill a function. Other companies are more oriented in terms of potential building and performance building. And so they say, we know that you have it in you. We need to give you the support you need to build those skills and then to harness those skills. And it also empowers the people. That's the other big ingredient for coaching. Is it puts the person in charge of their own agency. They're actually taking charge of their work. You can have people that just follow orders, but that runs at an expiry date. Or you can have people that have initiative, that take agency of their work, and that's built with coaching and with mentoring. And those people also make very innovative choices. They start going, you know what, I feel ownership of my job. I see an opportunity. I'm going to go for it. The people who just execute, they don't look for opportunities. They don't see opportunities. They don't take initiative. So in some ways, I would say companies have to make a decision about what kind of culture do you want. And a lot of companies do that subconsciously. But if you want to make a conscious choice, building in these mechanisms to give your people agency is going to become critical, especially with AI, because AI will move a lot more choice to us being designers, strategists, innovators of the workplace, because the mechanistic part of work is going to be outsourced in the long run.
And very nicely explained there. You said earlier, having mentoring and coaching in your workplace, it's very much about investing in your people to give them that actual platform to be able to be mentored and investing
Yeah.
back in people, and then also to be coached. Like it's such a massive investment in your people to make them feel like they're valued and seen and heard.
Exactly. And there is still a bit of a corporate separation between valuing people versus valuing profit. And I like to think of it as if when you value people and you empower them and give them agency and tools, they perform better. It's a very natural consequence. We see this on the sports field all the time, and it translates directly back into the workforce because people are people, whether they're on the sport field or in the office, they're not different. If you invest in me, I know from my own experience, and everyone listening to this will remember, those times when you feel a manager invests in you as a person, you're happy to give them a bit extra because, there's something about your energy and your value that's being seen that makes you go, it's fine, I can work an extra hour. Where the manager that treats you like you're just, human capital, you're like, it's 5 o'clock, I'm punching out. You just won't give anything extra because you don't want to. There's no motivational drive or connection.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. And we have definitely all been there. And on that note, it's now time for rest. On that, Albert, thank you for bringing such clarity and humanity into this conversation. There's so many really great takeaways that we discussed. The master of your own biology, I think, would have to be the best takeaway for myself. And it's also about that aligning our leadership with our biology isn't soft. It isn't a soft skill. It's smart. It's intelligent leadership, and it's the thing that leaders of the future and really intelligent, forward-thinking leaders are actually implementing today. And that staying human in an AI-driven world is perhaps the most radical leadership act of all. And so for those listening, if you'd like to learn more about Albert's work, they can connect with you on LinkedIn or explore your company called Be Fully Human, and as well as your coaching with the Sanctus group.
You can find befullyhuman.co or find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, I'd be happy to support you across different dimensions. There's the consulting, there's the coaching, and then there's these kind of conversations. Basically anything that connects us back to our humanity. I'm happy to help out.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Thank you for joining me on Making Work Work for Humans. And just a little note for our listeners is before you rush back into your day, maybe take a pause and ask yourself, where am I operating from survival mode? And what's one small shift I can make to return to being fully human?
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Selena.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If there's one thing I'd love you to take away from this conversation, it's that creating better workplaces starts with each of us. Sometimes it's one conversation, one decision, or one small change that creates a ripple effect far beyond what we can see. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Until next time, keep leading with curiosity, kindness, and courage. I'm Selena Jeffrey, and this is Making Work Work for Humans.